whilst the EU has achieved some important results for gender equality, it hasn't managed to deliver on its commitments as set out in 2007 communication, and specifically in the Gender Action Plan. Firstly, senior leadership and management haven't sufficiently prioritised gender, and so it's remained marginal to the core business of the organisation. Secondly, monitoring, evaluation and reporting of gender hasn't really facilitated effective oversight and accountability. And so, for example, if you look at the programme and country level, there's very little use of indicators, gender-sensitive indicators, so there's actually very limited data about what the organisation is doing on gender. The third reason relates to human resources, and the human resourcing has just been grossly inadequate. There's never been any analysis of the human resource needs to deliver the commitments that were made. And there's been an assumption that the staff will just be able to identify the gender issues in their work and develop appropriate responses. But in most cases, staff don't really see gender as their responsibility. They see it as the responsibility of the gender focal points. The fourth and final reason for such weak delivery relates to the very limited use of context analysis at the country level. So you have to understand what the problems are, the gender issues are in the country that you're working in. You have to understand where the opportunities lie and where the challenges lie.
I think one of the things that's been interesting in this evaluation has been that there are interesting programmes and projects which focus on gender issues. Often they're down to individual gender focal points. So the individual and personal commitment has been the sort of the key theme in terms of what's been able to be achieved. So it's a bleak message overall, but there are some really interesting examples of where progress has been made and results achieved for women and girls, men and boys. Well, in Morocco, I mean, the interesting case there has been that the national government there is very committed on gender. And there's really sort of the expectation from them has been that the EU will respond to that high level of commitment. And so the delegation in Morocco has responded and has put in place a number of major budget support programs, including, I think, almost a unique program in budget support in gender equality, which support those national government commitments. And as a result of that follow through on the national government commitments, the delegation in Morocco is now beginning to build up its capacity to carry out analysis in other sectors and fields, so that it can expand the focus on gender right across the programme. The main recommendation builds on or responds to the conclusion that there's been a lack of leadership, and so the main recommendation is that the political and senior management leadership for the EU should recommit itself to gender equality and women's empowerment. And that they need to follow through on that leadership by making sure that they're fully engaged with the development of the successor to the Gender Action Plan, and making sure that some of the conclusions, some of the problems that have been identified by the evaluation are addressed, so that there is sufficient capacity to be able to carry out gender analysis and to make sure that programmes are focused on gender issues.
Firstly, integrating gender targets into the Development and Cooperation Results Framework, but then seeing the successor to the GAP as the strategy for delivering those gender targets. So currently we have the GAP is a standalone piece with its own objectives, and it's not integrated, and that's how it gets marginalised. We need to bring that into the core of what the organisation does, how it manages its development efforts, and how it reports on them.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think where you see development organisations who've been successful in addressing gender equality, they have the capacity and the expertise in-house, so that they have somebody whose main responsibility is to focus on gender, Their responsibility is to work with their colleagues to help them to understand the situation, to carry out the gender analysis in their particular sector, to make sure that analysis is reflected in the development of their programs. So we've seen examples of that. For example, in the Netherlands, they might have a much smaller program focused on a much smaller number of countries, but they dedicate those resources, so they make sure that there's a gender advisor there. And I think that's a model which works well.
It's not quite as simple as saying you just need a full-time dedicated gender focal point. Actually, it's about, first of all, defining whose responsibility it is to drive this, and you need people at different levels of the organisation with responsibility. I think what we're seeing at the moment is that, gender's the responsibility of the GFP, I don't have to do it. That's not the situation we want. Yes, you want the expertise that the GFP offers, but responsibility sits with everyone. It's about integrating gender across the programme.
The UK government had a system of gender champions, so they were senior management people who were tasked with taking forward the commitments on gender. Initially what they tried was a financial reward system. So in addition to their regular salary, they got bonuses. And they got bonuses, gender was one of the areas where they got bonuses if they were deemed to have performed well. I was involved in a review of how that system had worked and how the delivery of the action plan for the UK government in development. And when we spoke to the senior management people, money was not an issue. They were not interested in the money. It was a minor issue for them. What they were interested in was that they saw that the leadership from the sort of like the head of the organisation put a high priority on gender, and they wanted to be recognised for having delivered against that.
Recognition is linked to advancement within the organisation. I think that's the driver, that performing well against a leadership priority in that context is the way you move upwards. I think that's a key incentive for ambitious staff.